Why does he need to check the thermostat one more time, even though he just checked it 5 minutes ago? Why does he ask you to send him a screenshot of the flight confirmation when he could just look it up himself? Why does it feel sometimes like he is not trying to help, he is trying to make sure nothing happens without him knowing first? I have spent a long time watching this pattern in people close to me, and I think most of us have someone like this in our lives. Maybe it is a father. Maybe it is a partner. Maybe, if you are honest with yourself for a second, it is you. There is a quiet, persistent need running underneath all of it, and it rarely announces itself directly. It hides inside small habits, small requests, small moments of tension that seem too minor to question. But once you see the pattern, you cannot stop seeing it. And I want to walk through it with you, piece by piece, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Most people assume control is about power, about wanting to be the boss, wanting to win, wanting things done a certain way because that way is simply correct. That is the surface explanation, the one people give you when you ask them directly, and it's not entirely false. But it's not the real engine underneath. The real engine is something much quieter and much sadder. He does not crave control because he believes he deserves authority over others. He clings to control because somewhere along the way, he learned that uncertainty is dangerous. Not inconvenient, not annoying, dangerous in a deep, almost physical sense. When a plan changes at the last minute, when a decision is made without him, when something happens that he did not see coming, his chest tightens, his mind starts spinning through worst-case scenarios, and the only thing that brings him back down is regaining a sense of grip on what's happening around him. You may recognize yourself in that description, even if you have never used the word control to describe yourself. You probably know someone exactly like him, someone who needs to know the schedule 3 days in advance, someone who rereads the same email 4 times before sending it, someone who insists on driving because sitting in the passenger seat feels unbearable. This need shows up in dozens of different shapes. Sometimes it looks like micromanagement at work. Sometimes it looks like anxiety about finances. Sometimes it looks like an inability to relax on vacation, because relaxing means letting go of the schedule, and letting go of the schedule means letting go of the one thing that has kept the anxiety quiet. I want to take you through how this need actually shows up in someone's daily life, the things he does without even noticing he is doing them, and the deeper reasons sitting behind each one. We'll start with what's easiest to see from the outside, the habits that other people notice and sometimes joke about. Then we'll move closer in, toward the things he feels but rarely says out loud, the private fears that never make it into conversation.
By the end, I think you will understand not just him, but possibly yourself, and possibly someone you love, a little more clearly than before. Let's start with the first sign, because it is the one almost everyone has witnessed at least once without realizing what it actually meant. He always wants the plan written down. Not just agreed on verbally, not just understood in general terms, but written down, with times, with specifics, with a clear sequence of events. I have noticed this in so many men of his generation, the ones who grew up believing that being responsible meant being prepared for anything. He sits at the kitchen table with a notepad before a family trip, mapping out departure times down to the minute, even though everyone around him insists they can figure it out as they go. He laughs along when someone teases him about it, calling himself the planner with a kind of self-deprecating pride, but underneath the laugh there is something firmer. If the plan changes, even slightly, you will see his jaw tighten before he says a word. The explanation underneath this is not really about logistics. A written plan functions as a kind of emotional anchor. It transforms an unknown future into something that already exists on paper, something predictable, something he has already lived through in his mind before it happens in real life. You may have felt this same pull yourself, the comfort of an itinerary, the unease of an empty, open day with no shape to it. For him, that unease is not mild. It is close to unbearable, which is why even small detours from the plan can trigger a reaction that seems wildly out of proportion to the actual change. And it is worth noticing that the plan rarely needs to be elaborate to do its job. Even a short list of times and locations scribbled on the back of an envelope seems to carry the same calming weight as a fully formatted itinerary, because the function it serves has very little to do with how detailed it actually is. That need to predict the future in advance does not stay confined to vacations and schedules. It bleeds into something a little harder to spot, which is his discomfort with other people making decisions on his behalf, even decisions that genuinely do not concern him. He never asks for help, and at first that looks like independence, like strength, like the quiet competence people often admire in him. But watch closely and you will notice something else hiding inside that independence. Asking for help means handing a piece of the outcome to someone else. It means trusting that another person will handle a situation the way he would handle it himself, and that trust does not come easily to him. I have seen him insist on assembling furniture alone rather than accepting an offer of help, not because he particularly enjoys assembling furniture, but because allowing someone else into the process means allowing for the possibility that things will not go the way he pictured them. He believes everything is under control as long as he is the one holding the instructions, the one turning the screwdriver, the one checking the final result against the picture on the box. The moment another set of hands enters the picture, the outcome becomes unpredictable in his mind, even if, realistically, the other person would do a perfectly good job. You may have felt this dynamic from the other side, offering help to someone you love and watching them quietly decline again and again until you stopped offering altogether. It can feel personal, like a rejection of your competence or your care, but it usually has very little to do with you and everything to do with his relationship to uncertainty itself. The thought of someone else holding even a small piece of an outcome activates the same uneasy feeling as an unplanned trip, just in a different setting. This is where the pattern starts to deepen, because it is no longer just about logistics or planning. It's starting to reveal itself as something closer to a belief system, a quiet conviction that safety depends on personal oversight, and that letting go of that oversight, even briefly, opens the door to something going wrong. From here, the pattern moves into something even less visible, something that often gets misunderstood for simple stubbornness. He struggles profoundly with decisions that are not his to make. Watch him in a restaurant when someone else picks where they're eating. Watch him in a meeting when a colleague takes a project in a different direction than he would have chosen. There is a particular stillness that comes over him, a kind of forced neutrality, as if he's working hard not to react.
I think this stillness is one of the most telling signs of all, because it shows the gap between what he feels and what he allows himself to express. Underneath that calm exterior, there is often a low hum of discomfort, the sense that something important is happening without his input, and that sense does not fade just because he chooses not to voice it. He may go along with the decision outwardly while quietly working to steer the outcome later, suggesting a small adjustment, offering just one piece of feedback, circling back to a topic that was supposedly already settled. These are not random habits. They are attempts to regain a thread of influence over a situation that, in his mind, has slipped slightly out of reach. You probably know someone exactly like him in a professional setting, the colleague who cannot fully let go of a task, even after handing it off, who keeps checking in just to see how it's going, who finds it almost physically difficult to stay quiet in a meeting where decisions are being made without his direct involvement. This reveals something important about where this need for control actually comes from. It is rarely about distrust of other people's competence. It is about discomfort with not knowing how things will turn out. discomfort that exists independent of who is actually making the decision. Even if the person making the choice is more skilled, more experienced, more capable than he is, the discomfort does not disappear, because the discomfort was never really about competence in the first place. It was about the unbearable sensation of standing outside the process, watching events unfold without a hand on the wheel. As we move closer to the core of this pattern, something quieter starts to surface, something that rarely gets discussed openly because it touches on a part of himself he was never taught to examine. He has an intense, almost reflexive discomfort with emotional vulnerability, and this connects to control in a way that might not seem obvious at first. Emotions, by their nature, are unpredictable. They arrive without a schedule. They do not respond well to planning or oversight. For someone whose entire sense of safety is built around predicting and managing outcomes, an emotion that rises up unexpectedly, sadness during a quiet moment, fear about aging, grief over a friendship that faded years ago, can feel like exactly the kind of uncontrolled event he has spent his whole life trying to avoid. So instead of sitting with the feeling, he manages it. He distracts himself with a task. He turns the conversation towards something practical. He says he is fine with a tone that closes the subject rather than opening it. I have seen this play out in quiet, almost invisible ways. A man whose father just died, organizing the funeral logistics with impressive efficiency, handling phone calls and paperwork and travel arrangements, while never once mentioning how he actually feels about the loss itself. From the outside, this can look like strength, like someone who is handling it well. But often what is actually happening is a redirection of grief into the one place that still feels manageable, which is action. You may have felt frustrated by this in someone close to you, wishing they would just talk about what they are feeling instead of immediately trying to fix something or organize something. It is worth understanding that this redirection is not coldness, it is a survival strategy, one that was likely built a long time ago in an environment where showing uncertainty or emotional need did not feel safe and where competence was the only currency that earned approval. This brings us to the deepest layer of the pattern, the place where all of these smaller behaviors finally connect into something whole. Underneath the planning, the resistance to asking for help, the discomfort with decisions made by others, and the redirection of emotion into action, there is usually a single formative belief, something absorbed early in life rather than reasoned out as an adult. Somewhere along the way, he learned that the world is safer when he's the one steering it. Maybe that lesson came from a household where chaos was common and a sense of order felt like the only protection available. Maybe it came from being the eldest child, expected to manage younger siblings while the adults around him were absent or overwhelmed.
Maybe it came from a culture common across many Western households of his generation that equated masculinity with competence and equated competence with never being caught off guard. Whatever the specific origin, the result is the same. Control became, very early, a stand-in for safety itself, and the nervous system never quite let go of that association, even decades later, even in situations that have nothing to do with the original source of the lesson. This is why control rarely looks like simple bossiness from the inside. From his perspective, it does not feel like a desire to dominate anyone. It feels like vigilance. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the only sensible way to move through a world that, somewhere deep down, he still does not fully trust to be safe without his attention on it. And this is exactly why these patterns are so difficult to change through confrontation alone. Telling him to relax or to let go addresses the behavior, but it does not address the belief sitting underneath the behavior, the quiet conviction that letting go is the same thing as letting something bad happen. Now I want to turn this back toward you, because the point of walking through all of this was never really about him as a separate, distant figure. It was about giving you a clearer lens for the people in your own life, and possibly for yourself. Think about the moments when you feel the strongest urge to manage a situation rather than simply experience it. Think about whether that urge tends to show up around logistics, around emotions, around decisions that other people are making. There is no need to judge what you find. Awareness on its own does not require a verdict. It simply asks you to notice where the grip is tightest and to ask, gently, what that grip might be protecting. Maybe it is protecting an old wound. Maybe it is protecting a memory of a time when things truly did fall apart and no one else stepped in to hold them together. Maybe it is protecting a fear that has never been named out loud, not even to the people closest to you. A fear that may have been sitting quietly in the background for so long that it now feels less like an emotion and more like simply the way things are. If you have someone like this in your life, it might also be worth asking what their controlling moments are actually communicating underneath the surface. The refusal for a written plan may be less about logistics and more about anxiety asking quietly for reassurance. The refusal to ask for help may be less about independence and more about an old, deeply rooted discomfort with vulnerability. None of this excuses behavior that genuinely hurts the people around it, and there is a difference between understanding a pattern and accepting harm caused by it. But understanding does tend to soften the instinct to take these behaviors personally, and it often opens a door toward a more honest, less combative conversation than the one you might have had before watching this. There is another piece of this story that we have not touched yet, a piece that has less to do with where this need for control comes from and more to do with what happens when life eventually forces that grip to loosen, whether he wants it to or not. That part of the picture deserves its own space because it asks an even harder question, one about what is left underneath the need for control once control itself becomes impossible to maintain. Thank you so much for staying with me through this one. If any part of this resonated with you, whether it described someone you love or quietly described yourself, I would really love to hear about it in the comments. What does control look like in your life, and where do you think it first started? If this video gave you a new way of seeing someone close to you, consider giving it a like. It genuinely helps this kind of conversation reach more people who might need it. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind the behaviors we rarely talk about openly, go ahead and subscribe. There is a lot more of this ahead. Thanks again for being here, and I will see you in the next one.